John Ruddick grew up in Tamworth and came to Sydney in 1991 to study at the University of Sydney. During that time, he joined the Liberal Party and worked as a staffer for Ross Camron in Parliament. After witnessing the Morrison Government's overreach in power and control in its response to the COVID pandemic and support for the climate change agenda, he decided in 2021 to leave the Liberal Party and join the Liberal Democrats. He is also the lead Senate candidate for the upcoming 2022 federal election. John is also a regular contributor to the Spectator Australia and has appeared on many times on Sky News, along with many other mainstream and alternative news programs. So John, welcome.
Good evening, Daniel. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you. Just to start off, could you please tell everyone a little bit about your background, what got you into politics, and why did you initially decide to join the Australian Liberal Party?
Well, I thought that, look, I was just somebody who from a young age was interested in history. I was interested in history before I was interested in the news. I remember when I was about 4 years older, I heard a relative talk about the olden days. And I was just absolutely intrigued by what I remember thinking, gee, I wonder what happened in the olden days. So I was always interested in history. And when I was a teenager, I would usually watch the evening news and read the papers and talk to my parents about politics. And I just sort of came to the view that, in my early 20s, people are often idealistic in their 20s. I think I probably still am idealistic. And I thought, well, look, the party in Australia that most represents the values that have made Western civilization great is the Liberal Party. And those values were basically centered around freedom. So democratic freedom, economic freedom, civil freedom. And I thought that, and the Liberal Party has on balance been a very good political party in Australian history. Most people have got it in their head that this country's been run sort of 50% of the time by Labor and 50% of the time by Liberal. But in fact, since Federation, the Liberal Party and the parties which were the ancestors of the Liberal Party, but basically the same thing, have dominated Australian history. And Australia's been a very successful nation. So the Liberal Party's been very good, but I just feel in the last, look, particularly since John Howard left office, it's really sort of gone downhill. I mean, we're just getting unimpressive members of parliament, people who just are in parliament because they want the perks of office. They're not so much interested in the power. Now, politicians that want power can be good and can be bad. If they want the power to do good things, to dismantle the government, to make the government smaller, that's a good politician that wants power. But the Liberal Party is full of what I call perk hunters. So they're just desperate for perks, and they're desperate for the prestige that being a member of parliament gives them. And so these are people that will not be thinking about what's in the interest of Australia in the next generation or the generation after that. They'll be thinking what's in their own personal interest. And we see that with these modern liberals in these wealthy suburbs. These very ambitious people got into these what they once thought were very, very safe seats, and now they're going to fight for them, but they've completely capitulated, on the global warming hocus pocus. And so they think, oh, well, a lot of people in my electorate have fell for the hocus pocus, so I've got to pretend I've fallen for it. Now, what they've done is they've fed the crocodile, and now the crocodile's coming for them.
Right. Well, staying on that topic, during your time within the Liberal Party, you did fight for reform. In 2018, you wrote the book to make the Liberal Party great again. Could you please give a quick overview of what the problems was within the party and what you recommended?
Well, the problem that I was trying to overcome is that the Liberal Party, particularly the New South Wales Liberal Party, but also in the other divisions, is dominated by factional bosses, which are not far removed from mafia bosses. Now, I'm not saying that they're criminals that kill people, but they're only one or two rungs below that. They're quite ruthless people. They've got no interest in good policy. And they now when we say they've got power within the party organisation, the most important thing, all the fighting that goes on with any political party is about who gets to wear the nomination badge on election day, who gets to wear the Liberal Party badge on election day. That's what they're all fighting over, because there's millions of Australians out there which will just blindly vote for the Liberal Party. They won't care who the candidate is. They'll care who's wearing the badge, and they'll just vote for that person. So the key thing is to win the nomination or the pre-selection. Now, I wanted to make it so it was a much more democratic process, so that all the party members in a local seat, so I live in North Sydney, so I would say there's roughly sort of 600-700 people who are members of the Liberal Party in North Sydney, and I would say that all 600-700 of them should have a vote on who they think the best candidate is. Now, that's not the case, and you know, those reforms, you know, we thought that we had brought in that reform where the lower house candidates were elected by the local members, but then Scott Morrison's come in. He didn't like what the democratic process was producing, so he just went and appointed 12 of his mates. And I think that'll be one of the key, if he does lose the election, that'll be one of the key reasons why, because he got a lot of bad publicity over that. And but the main thing that made the Liberal Party great again was advocating for was that the party leadership, the parliamentary leadership, so that would be Scott Morrison and Dominic Perrottet, they would be elected by all the members of the party. Now that seems radical to most Australians who follow politics, but this is what happens in Canada. This is how Boris Johnson became the Prime Minister. So I was, you know, and we wouldn't end up with people like Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison who just simply are not true believers. If all the members vote, they're only going to vote for a true believer. Someone like Tony Abbott would have a better chance of winning. In fact, he would easily have beaten Malcolm Turnbull and easily have beaten Scott Morrison. Now, I knew that under Scott Morrison, that these reforms would not be welcomed, and it's difficult to get party reforms through when the party is in government. So I was going to wait him out. I was going to say, okay, Scott Morrison, you can be their Prime Minister for 10 years, and I will wait for you to be not there, and then I will champion these reforms. But then what happened was little thing came along called COVID and COVID extremism and the COVID police state and the COVID debt and then the zero carbon economy. And I just thought, okay, look, the emergency is now. We don't have time to wait for opposition. So we've got to put the political energy into what I've always thought is Australia's best political party, which is the Liberal Democrats, which are a policy purist party. They've got the right policy recipe for this country that is desperately needed right now. And I've been a member of the Liberal Democrats for almost 12 months, and it was the best political decision I've made. And I very much enjoy being with the Liberal Democrats, being with people who are true believers in ideas, which you do very rarely get in the Liberal Party.
Mm-hmm. Well, would you, although the Liberal Democrats are trying to appeal to across the spectrum of voters and support, would it be safe to say that the Liberal Democrats could be seen as the Liberal Party in exile for its disillusioned voters and members?
Well, I quite like that, Daniel. Yes, the Liberal Party in exile. Yes, I mean, look, our policy platform, which we've called our Freedom Manifesto, is very much in line with what John Howard as opposition leader was promoting in the 1980s, what Margaret Thatcher was promoting, what Ronald Reagan was promoting. Probably goes further than what Howard proposing, because we're proposing a flat tax, a flat company tax and a flat income tax, just 20%, nice and simple, keep it simple. But one of the great advantages of a flat tax is, in addition to people being able to save more of their money, which means they've got more of an incentive to work hard, etc., is that it just simplifies things. Now, we have hundreds of thousands of Australians out there, intelligent people called accountants, who spend their whole lives weaving their way through the Income Tax Assessment Act, which is a very big, very, 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 very big document. I think when I studied tax law at university, and it was the Income Tax Assessment Act in the mid 1990s was 2 thick volumes. I think it's like probably tripled in size since then. The flat tax, but because of the complexity means that we have to have intelligent people, lawyers and accountants, working out how to sort of help their clients. Well, these intelligent people should be putting their energy into something far more productive than tax minimisation. So we just say, well, let's minimise it at 20%. And now John Howard wasn't proposing that. The Fight Back package in 1993 with John Hewson, which was a pretty radical document, a pretty good document, but it wasn't proposing a flat tax. In fact, it was proposing a 15% GST. So we are confident the Freedom Manifesto is Australia's greatest federal policy document, at least since the 1930s. Our favourite Prime Minister is Joe Lyons, who was a terrific Prime Minister in the 1930s. And he's largely forgotten, poor old Joe Lyons, because Labor doesn't like him and the Liberal Party don't like him, both for different reasons. But he was Australia's most successful Prime Minister. He won the biggest election result in 1931 in the depths of the Depression. He had almost 60% two-party preferred vote for him. He won 3 out of 3 elections very comfortably, and very, very popular man. It's unfortunately forgotten because he had been a member of the Labor Party, so the Labor Party hates him. He ratted on the Labor Party. And the Liberal Party doesn't like Joe Lyons because the Liberal Party people think that history begins with Robert Menzies. And Robert Menzies, Joe Lyons and Robert Menzies were partners there for many years, but then they had a falling out. Robert Menzies tried to challenge him for the leadership, for the prime ministership in 1939, just before World War II, and poor old Joe Lyons had a heart attack, probably as a result of Menzies. So a bit of ill will there between Menzies and Lyons. Menzies was a truly great man. There's no doubt about that. I mean, he's probably my second favourite, probably my third favourite prime minister. There's a very good one called George Reid as well, who's also forgotten. But that's the Freedom Manifesto. I encourage your listeners, Daniel, to have a look at it. Just type in Liberal Democrats Freedom Manifesto. It'll take you about 20 minutes to read, but there's some bold policy in there, and they're all very good policies.
Mm-hmm. In keeping with COVID, that was said to be one of your aha moments of deciding to actually leave the party. Why do you think, given that Australia doesn't matter if it's liberal or Labor, being that it's a Western liberal capitalist society, why do you think it seemed to be so hell bent on following the communist Chinese method in dealing with COVID? It seemed to be completely out of its normal way of doing things, and it seemed to basically alienate large members of its own society.
Well, look, the whole world was sort of, bar Sweden, the whole world was sort of hoodwinked by these lockdowns. Now, I'm convinced that it was because there was forces out there that wanted to bring down Donald Trump. Every year we have a bad flu that goes around the world. It's been happening since we were cavemen. Sometimes the flu's a modest flu, a moderate flu. Sometimes it's a bit worse than usual. Occasionally it's a very bad flu. That's what COVID was. It was a very bad flu. They didn't want to call it a flu. They had to call it COVID-19. They had to give it this sort of sci-fi name to freak people out, to think it's some whole new thing. It was just a bad flu. Look, it probably was engineered in a Chinese lab, but it was still a natural flu that they just sort of tinkered with a little bit in that lab. If that thesis is correct, which sounds credible to me. And then this was COVID really kicked off in February 2020. Now, at that time, Trump was about 9 months away from Trump's re-election. And the Democrats were having their primary at that time, and we had Joe Biden, the geriatric, we had Bernie Sanders, the geriatric communist, two very unimpressive candidates. They were desperate to destroy Trump. They'd tried everything, they'd thrown everything at him. He'd been a magnificent president, world peace, no wars, good, very strong economy, particularly for poor people, which is the most important indicator, helping ambitious people move up, okay? And then they had to destroy Trump. So a bad flu came along. I think it's hard to believe that it was engineered to come along, but you just can't rule it out, but I think it's probably unlikely. But it just popped along, and what did they think? They thought, let's hype this thing up. Let's make it 20 times worse than it is, and let's blame it on Trump. And Trump was lost his footing over it, and sort of stumbled with it because they're blaming him for something which if that's exactly the same flu had come out when Obama was the president, it would have been largely gone unnoticed. And you would have got to page 5 of the Sydney Morning Herald at the end of the flu season, and we would have read, oh, Australia had a really bad flu season last year, worst in 15 years. That would have been a page 15 article, and people would have looked at themselves, probably would have been 3 times as many deaths as usual from COVID. People in the elderly stages. This is who dies of the flu every year, whether it's COVID or not COVID. That's been happening. It's a normal part of our society, and so they, if it had just been treated as it should have been, as a reasonably serious public health concern, then if Obama was the president, we would have read it in the paper, and people would have said, yeah. People would have said, yeah. Well, I actually had a really bad flu. Yes, and most people would have said, yeah, it was bad this season. This is just part of life, but they hyped it up. Then they, then they had to say it's the worst thing ever, worst thing that's ever happened. We've got to shut ourselves down, shut the businesses down, pay everyone to stay home, get ourselves into endless debt, over a bad flu. And then they got rid of Trump. That was the goal. But then they couldn't immediately say, oh well, now let's just call this thing off. They had to be our saviors. They came up with the vaccine, a very, very rushed vaccine. Not only was it a rushed vaccine, they told us it's a brand new type of vaccine, an mRNA vaccine. Now, Daniel, I don't know what the hell that means. It's not my field, but they did tell us it's brand new, a brand new type of technology. And I just thought, okay, well, I don't know why they're rushing this, I think I thought to myself when it first came out, I thought it will probably be helpful. It may be not helpful, but harmless. But I thought there's a 5% chance it's going to be harmful, more harmful than beneficial. And so I didn't want to take the vaccine, and I have not taken the vaccine. And I wrote an article for the Spectator last year called "Why I Have Not Taken the Vaccine." And I thought, look, I've had COVID, and I was in, it was not that serious. It didn't feel great for about a day and a half, and it just disappeared. And so I just thought, this is a global hysteria. I think people are now waking up all around the world. People who I know that were really freaked out about it not too long ago are now sort of saying, yeah, well, we've all been hoodwinked, okay? And they first told us, Daniel, take one vaccine, you won't catch COVID. You're good. One vaccine, you're good. Then that quickly became 2. Then 2 became 3. Then they said, oh, well, 3, but then you can still catch it. You can still pass it on. That's a great vaccine. Now they're talking about number 4. Okay. The pharmaceutical companies can't get sued. Pharmaceutical companies get endless product endorsement from the media, by the government. Okay, so the whole thing is absolutely shocking, and it's a sign of, I think the West is so wealthy, so successful, that we're sort of resting on our laurels. The West was extremely impressive in the 20th century, particularly winning World War II and winning the Cold War, which is a very, very big deal, that Cold War, and we won it. Gloriously won it, and made the world a better place by winning the Cold War. And then after that, we've become so rich, so fat, so lazy, so successful, and we're full of our own self-righteousness. We think that we can't do anything wrong, and we've become weak. And that's how COVID was a symptom of Western decline. I'm not saying we're in permanent decline, but I am saying that we are in a declining period. But you know, Rome had lots of dips, and then it would recover with strength. And let's hope that's what's going to happen to us.
Mm-hmm. Well, in keeping with the upcoming election, what is your analysis or of how things are going and prediction of what could be the outcome? I mean, for example, would the people by the time election come get pacified and just end up voting for one of the two major parties, or will the Liberal Democrats and other minor parties have a surge and have a breakthrough moment and get a foothold within the actual government, or will Morrison lose, or will he win with a reduced majority? What's your observations?
Well, my hunch is that Albo wins, and that it won't be a hung parliament, but it won't be a big majority, but it'll be a reasonable majority. And I'm simply basing that off the published polling. Okay, now 3 years ago, I was all over Twitter, and I wrote an article for the Spectator saying, look, I think Scott Morrison's going to win this. The polling actually tells us he's going to win it. He was narrowly behind, but Australian history says if the incumbent is narrowly behind, they always win. Now, what we have now is the polls started off, the campaign started off two-party preferred. ScoMo was on about 45. Albo had a bad opening 2 weeks. It's up to 47, but it has plateaued there at 47. If ScoMo can hit 48 in the coming news poll, then he might pull it off. But that seems to have stalled. I think the country's I think ScoMo's biggest problem is I think that there's about 5% of Australians out there are ideologically committed conservatives who think that the Liberal Party has been such an extreme disappointment, and who think that there's so little difference between Liberal and Labor at the moment that they're thinking it won't be a bad thing. Excuse me. It won't be a bad thing if the Liberals go into opposition for a period, so they can hopefully get themselves back on track. They might just implode, and maybe there will be a replacement party on the right. Let's hope that's the Liberal Democrats. The really important thing for this election, because Liberal and Labor are the same thing at the moment, very little difference. The important thing is how well are the Freedom parties going to go. Now, the opinion polls say they're roughly on about 10%. I hope that's going to be more than that. There's three sort of prominent, what we call Freedom parties. There's the United Australia Party, there's One Nation, and there's the Liberal Democrats. There are several other very good parties, or Freedom parties as well. There's GAP, there's IMOP, there's the Federation Party, and I apologise if I've left out others. Now, let's hope that every state is going to elect 6 senators at this election. Let's hope that and I think this will probably happen, that there'll probably be 1 senator will be elected from a Freedom Party at this coming federal election. I'll be thrilled if that's the case. Now, I'll be double thrilled if it's a Liberal Democrat. I think that the few Liberal Democrats that have been in Parliament have been outstanding parliamentarians. And the other parties have had people in there. They have had some good parliamentarians, but a lot of them have not been good parliamentarians. And so I think the Liberal Democrats would be the ones that would be the one to vote for. Look, we don't have Clive's money and we don't have Pauline's brand, but we do have the best policies.
Okay, I think we're out of time at the moment. Would you like to tell us where people can reach you and where they can follow you?
Twitter is my main platform. I've got an article in the Spectator tomorrow, which I'll encourage people to have a look at, which is called Bring Back Christianity. Now, I'm not a big church goer myself, But I have recently come to the view, that we have replaced Christianity in the last 2 generations in the West. And a lot of people think that we've become a secular society. Now, I think we've just created a vacuum, and we've filled that vacuum with lies. So I'm thinking, look, Christianity has served us very well for almost 2,000 years. I'm thinking we need to sort of have a renewed appreciation for the goodness of Christianity.
Okay, well, very interesting. We'll have to check that out. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining me, and
Good on you, Daniel. Thanks for having me, mate.
good luck for the upcoming election.
Thank you. Good on you.